Hey guys, Kelly Ehlert here with Priority Physical Therapy. I have been on quarantine for a few days. I've been on break this week. So I feel like for us, it hasn't been as long. During the time of this recording, the pandemic is probably at its prime. I guess we're supposed to be kind of under lockdown another week or so. So in the meantime, I wanted to give you guys a few tips and pointers for stress incontinence. And this was the conversation that I had with a friend who is a fitness instructor downtown Nashville. She owns and runs a women's group. And so I wanted to target her group, but then also make this applicable to a little bit of everybody. So just going to quick introduce you guys to me. I am Kelly. I own Priority Physical Therapy in Mount Juliet. I do have the ability to do telehealth. I do have the ability to do home visits. I just, right now with everything, we'll probably be under lockdown and do mainly telehealth. And there's a lot of things we can talk about with this. So my husband, Weldon, is a teacher and a fisherman. If your husband needs a motor, odds are they've met him. My daughter is 8 and second grade, and my son is Colin, who's in pre-K 4. So today we're going to talk about stress incontinence. There's a few different kinds of incontinence. Stress incontinence is just one of them. There's urge incontinence, functional incontinence, neurogenic, and there's a few different kinds, but stress is the most common. That's what we see when the internal pressure is stronger than the external pressure. So when we cough or sneeze, something is pushing downwards and we're not retaliating with our muscles in time. 1 in 3 women are noted to have pelvic floor dysfunction or even just incontinence. I feel like this is higher. I feel like a lot of us don't admit to it. Super common during pregnancy. 48% of pregnant women by their 30th week have had bouts of incontinence, and that's where there's anything from drops of urine to full needing to change your undies. 67% of ladies who've given birth have had incontinence, same thing, in their 3rd trimester. So we see that almost double with that population. And basically, as the baby grows, there's just more pressure and the muscles aren't quite as strong, usually subsequent pregnancies. And then we see a rise again postmenopausal with a change in hormones. There's a huge correlation with estrogen and just general intense, tensile force and strength of the pelvic floor muscles, which we'll talk about a little bit more in specific. And so we see that happen again then. So once again, why does stress incontinence happen? Stress incontinence happens when the internal force is stronger than the external control. So the strength of the muscles, so you can see the pelvic floor muscles. Oh, you can't see my screen. You can't see my mouse. Pelvic floor muscles are 3 layers of muscle. So these are huge, y'all. Like they control a lot of things. We'll talk about that more in a second. The coordination isn't there. Those muscles just aren't contracting in a synchronized, or the timing's not right. You cough or sneeze or clear your throat, those muscles aren't retaliating in time. There's a nerve injury. A lot of times with delivery, the pudendal nerve, which has 3 huge branches on each side of the pelvic floor, can get injured. A fall, a trauma, sometimes abuse, sometimes those situations can disrupt the integrity of the pelvic floor, and then a muscle injury. A lot of times this happens during birth, and a lot of us don't know until we're like, I can't hold my pee anymore. So other stats, I just wrote a bunch of other things down because this is super common. Trampolinists were known up to 80% of them to have pelvic floor dysfunction or leakage. Elite athletes, especially with eating disorders, were known to have issues here. And they think too with that population, especially the bulimic population, the nutrition played a huge role in that connective tissue just not being up to par to heal and retaliate. And if you think about that, the vomiting that goes with that, or if you've had, was it hematuresis? No, that's not it. No, that's blood in your urine. Where you have a ton of vomiting during your pregnancy, that pressure, or some chronic issues with coughing, that can be constant kind of bombardment to the pelvic floor. They say there was one study that I thought was interesting that looked at cough force and jumping, and they noticed that those had the same amount of force production. And so I think for some of it's just a matter of, are you preparing? Are those muscles synchronized and in sync, and what can we do? So we know the CrossFit gets a lot of negative chatter. I don't personally do it, but a lot of it's time, and honestly, it's time, and probably just I'm full of excuses. But the top 3 associated CrossFit exercises were double unders at 47 points. So almost half of those ladies leaked during a study, jumping rope, and box jumps. And so it's that impact, it's that high pressure kind of activity and exercise that usually wields the most kind of leakage. And so what I want to go on record to say is that postpartum can be a few years until we regain and learn how to control those muscles again. We'll talk about that more in specific in a second. But those activities can be catered to or from. Like, there's never and always in women's health and in the pelvic floor and then in the exercise world. There's a lot of us in my mindset, I'm going to an awesome course, hopefully if everything calms down in September, that's going to look more at the female athlete and how to modify things to get women who have diastases and other issues back to what they want to do without leading them into other dysfunction. Because that's the whole issue, is if we do something so often, are we leading to other issues later? How does the body work? So I'm going to stand up and see if you guys can still hear me. So we look at the body. We've got our diaphragm here, pelvic floor in the bottom, abs in the front, and spine in the back. And so it forms this natural pump. We breathe in, the diaphragm contracts, the belly expands, the rib expand, and the pelvic floor drops slightly. And then we get this nice piston, nice recoil. The ribs expand, the diaphragm drops, the spine actually moves backwards a little bit. What happens during pregnancy is those ribs flare more. And so a lot of times we lose that control of the obliques, or they get super tight because they're kind of on guard all the time. And when 1, 2, 3, or 4 of those pieces don't work optimally, the other pieces of the puzzle pick up the slack. Most of the time postpartum, once postpartum, always postpartum. I hate that comment, but it is so true. There's always things that we'll have to kind of just watch and be aware of, maybe not eliminate. So especially if you deliver vaginally and have a scar, or you have a C-section, have a scar, sometimes you just have to work a little harder to get those pieces of that puzzle, that canister, optimal again. What is the pelvic floor? Pelvic floor is a group of muscles that lives in the pelvis. So there's 3 layers of muscles. The first 2 are kind of your quick contract muscles. Only 30% of our pelvic floor muscles are like your sprinter muscles, and 70% is your endurance-based holder upper muscles. All of these muscles together support the organs, stabilize the pelvis, help with sexual pleasure and function. They're part of our lymphatic system, or our pump, kind of get the system from the legs up into the internal organs where they need to go, as far as lymphatics and the cardiovascular system. And it's also sphincteric, which is exactly what we're talking about. So it holds, those little muscles contract to hold in urine, gas, and then our bowel movements or our feces. So here's a picture of all of that. You can see in the front, that white is your pubic bone, right behind it is your bladder, above that is your uterus, behind that is your rectum, and all those yellow little lines in front of the spine, wish I had a mouse that would work, are your nerves, your spinal plexus, and then you can see the spine in the back. And at the very bottom, if you can see, you've got your urethra, which is your pee hole. You got your vaginal canal and your rectum, and you can see a little line of just pink muscles that go across the bottom. Those are your pelvic floor muscles. Most of us don't realize we have them or need them until they don't work. So a lot of this is, I'm trying to make this simple to understand. The first thing I think all of us need to accept and know that if you leak, it's common. Do not accept it as a normal. There are a lot of things, a lot of us in the postpartum and the pelvic floor world personally have dealt with, that have got us on this journey typically, that we can help you overcome. I'll tell you all my story at some point, but The next huge thing is if you don't think something is right, you have that, mamas have that intuition, women have that intuition. If you feel like something's not right, get it assessed. Women's health pelvic floor physical therapists look at things completely differently than a medical doctor. They're worried about, you know, are the sutures correct? Are the organs in line to some degree? Are they like present? And are you bleeding? Beyond that, it's kind of up to us as health professionals in the PT world or even in the fitness world to kind of recognize these, recognize some of the things that just aren't normal. So leaking when you cough and sneeze, pain with sex, back pain, abdominal separation, problems with breathing. You just feel like you can't take that deep breath. Posture, you feel like you're living up here like this. So all that is something that we can do, and kind of stuck it on here of things that we look at. What is the belly button doing when you're breathing? When you cough, what is the belly doing? So a lot of this is helping us give you cues on what are you dealing with. Is it a pure pelvic floor weakness, like those muscles just aren't strong enough and so the urine's leaking out? Is it those muscles aren't contracting? Here's the bladder, here's the pelvic floor. Is the bladder contracting before the pelvic floor can kind of stop it? Or is the nerve just, are they just not talking? One of the huge things that that you can do that I know you're already doing and to be more aware of is the importance of glute strength. So doing clamshells, I'll see if I can demonstrate some of these on my nice deck. So clamshells are getting on your side, leaning forward and rotating your hip up. There are a million different ways you can do this. I have a bunch of them written down if you want them. Fire hydrants, where you're raising that leg up. Kickbacks, any of those, the squat and the side steps. Single leg deadlift. Any of those kind of things that you're strengthening the glutes around the pelvic floor, because of those little internal muscles you can see on that picture run through and in and around the pelvic floor. They have a lot of the same nerve that talk to them, and they just help support each other. And then you can get to some more of the quicker, specific, like timing things, like squeeze before you clear your throat, or you take a side step, you squeeze your pelvic floor, and then you step, squeeze, and then step, squeeze, baby hop, squeeze, baby hop. So you're working on firing that pelvic floor with the coordination of everything else. Alignment is huge. This is something that I catch myself doing, especially washing my hands and leaning against the desk to do my notes. So I'm going to see if I can show you this here. And I've got a loose shirt, so I'll see. So alignment, if you tend to lean like this, or if your ribs are like this, you can kind of see my ribs flare out. Or if you're, let me just tuck my shirt up. Or if your back's arched, we kind of want a neutral pelvis. We want our weight over our heels. We want our ribs down. So if you couldn't hear me, ribs need to be neutral, pelvis needs to be neutral, and then weight needs to be over your heels. So ears over shoulders, shoulders over kind of hips, hips over heels, where everything is aligned. There's a lot of us who still, and me included, have a really bad tendency to do this. And once again, your body follows that. And if you do that all the time, there's more force that's pushed down through the internal organs, that intra-abdominal pressure, and just something to be aware of. So here's that, just another picture. So you've got the pubic bone is kind of the orange, the green is the bladder, yellow is the uterus, and the bowels are in the back. But when we stand, we're not, our pelvis isn't like this. We stand, it's kind of shifted. So one of the things, if you guys have trouble jumping and have leakage, one of the things is make sure you're not holding your breath, because we tend to overcompensate. And so what that does, we're not getting that, we're just getting constant pressure downwards. We're not letting that natural like rise and ebb and flow. Another thing is you can kind of think about where you're keeping your pelvis. And running running for that matter too. So watching how you're tipping. You don't want to be super tipped because once again that jams your spine together, but you also need to know that that pubic bone is kind of like a little shelf for everything, and it just kind of holds stuff up. So that's all I created for today. Alignment is your big one. Timing and sequence. Can you actually do a pelvic floor contraction? What does that look like? And strengthening the glutes are kind of your three. And the fourth one is just make sure you're not holding your breath, because breathing patterns and pressure and too much intra-abdominal pressure can all create issues there. Hope you guys learned something. If you have any questions, please holler at me and we will talk soon.